the way that I kind of try to train myself over the years has been an exercise that I've always referred to as the 49 chords exercise. Different people who've done this exercise and been really diligent about it. It makes a pretty dramatic difference, usually in about a month. I call it the 49 chords exercise, which it's a 3-day cycle, dominant 7th chords, minor 7th chords, and major 7th chords. And I just look at the most default you can get. Dorian for minor 7 chords, major scale for major 7, because Lydian's an alteration. So when Lydian happens, I want Lydian to mean something, because to me, that gives me a much different sensation than, and I don't want to, the reason why I don't want to make Lydian the default that's in my fingers and my muscle memory is because if I'm comping behind someone who's taking a solo and they go, they play something like that, but I'm over here going like, woo, yeah, because I always know to play Lydian on major, so it's, for me, I go default, it's just the major scale, and then, of course, mix Lydian for dominant 7s, and so I don't think it matters what order you do this, but always keep it rotating, so it's a 3-day cycle, so let's say day 1, minor 7th chords, and what you do on day 1, let's say we start out with the minor 7th day, and we're on G minor 7, so we're dealing with Dorian. And so all we're doing is, since we just have those 7 notes, I'll try to create 7 different shapes that are comprised of all different notes. That's the only parameter. They just have to all be different. They have to be within that scale. Then you take that, move it up and down 12, up and down the octave. You stay diatonic, and then you create another shape. And so for each key, I'd call it the 49 chords exercise, because the way that I did it was I would create 7 shapes, and then I'd move on to the next key. So for G, a quick one would be, okay, maybe you take a couple of these 7 shapes, could be right-hand shapes, let's say. So maybe I go, okay, 3-note shape on G minor. And every single note goes up 1 notch at a time in the scale. So now, shape number 2. And don't memorize anything or write it down or whatever. It's all got to be physical. It's a tactile exercise. So now maybe my second one, I'm just going to pick 4. Now move that. And if you're a horn player, you can't play multiple notes at the same time. You got to arpeggiate these, and you get a lot out of that too. But so let's, so then I'd take some left-hand voicings and, literally just any different notes that might be in the scale. That works. Now this by itself is not considered a G minor 7, but what this gives you is passing chords, which make it dramatically more melodic when you're comping. You can respond to different things better by having more options and, moving that up and down. Now my left hand, there's a couple of these that I can't even reach. Now my left hand gets to feel things like this, what that feels like. So if it was just G minor and my first go-to is this, that actually ends up limiting a lot of things when you're comping for yourself, like that I would play in my right hand. If I play this in my left hand, then my right hand, it's so home bassy that I can't, but something like this, just even the actual inversion of it, or the shape of that chord, the fact that it has no repeats in it, but also it's a little spread out, intervallically it'll give me other ideas and things. And so getting shapes like that in your hand, or shapes that are a little bit more unconventional and harder to reach, you could take a big 7-note or 6-note shape using all of those. Great chord that, now let's say that let's pretend we fell in love with this chord. So, definitely move it. You also don't have to worry about if the first chord sucks, because if the first chord sucks, then it's a passing chord. And by taking it up and down, you'll run it through eventually a place where you'll come to a use of that chord that you really like. So let's say we fell in love with this, right? So we go around all 12 keys, we go up to, and we're only doing minor 7s this day, all different shapes, created new every time. So, no pattern to it or whatever. Just pick different note, different note, different note. And don't worry if it doesn't sound good, because you're just taking it through the system, so your fingers have to work out the tactile landscape. So then let's say there's day number 2. I can't remember what the chord I was using as a, let's just say it was this or whatever. So day number 2, you're going around in major 7s now, and you're going... you get done with E or whatever, and you move to F, and you're like, okay, oh wow, there's that same chord from day one. And so what ends up happening is when it automatically, some of the chords that just sound the juiciest and best, they'll just naturally start popping into your muscle memory. Because, you know, a lot of times, like, we just play chords because it just feels good. Like, there's some chords and things that just feel good to play, and it's hard to explain why, but it's like, okay, yeah, something about that feels like I've had, and I think it's all the past memories of playing that chord where you had a positive experience and it's now associated with that chord. But you want to let that kind of a thing happen organically, which really shows that it's working. That means that this system of shapes, your hands are now getting used to different shapes. And a shape like this, there's no repeats in that. You know, so if I want to change this slightly, you know, in anything where I'll pick a simpler chord, like, you know, there's ways of moving one note at a time. If you don't have any repeats, that's all you have to do. And so different things where might be one repeat that sneaks in there and stuff, but by the fact that my hands will usually hunt for chords and shapes that those are the shapes it knows to land on. It's just ones that aren't going to have many repeats and stuff. Then it becomes so much easier to be more subtle and nuanced with internal voice leading. Also, some things like this, you know, it helps stretch the hand out to some shapes that are a little wider. So, like, let's say we're used to, you know, someone gives us a chart and it says like B flat major 7 sharp 11 over D, and, you know, which might be something like, you know, something like that. And if we're used to thinking, okay, chord, play something over the chord, a lot of times then that ends up sounding kind of scalar. But my hands are used to more spread out shapes. So usually if I want to flourish or an arpeggio, instead of doing like, you know, doing some sort of scalar thing, my hands might take a shape like this, and that might be the shape that I'm arpeggiating. You know, and so what ends up happening is those same shapes that after about a month, there's different shapes that start popping up in your hand, like kind of start holding your toothbrush a little differently and stuff. Like something feels different. It's like learning guitar or something. It just, there's the shapes your hands are starting to get used to different shapes. Plus, physically, it's doing the same exact exercise every day. Sneakily, that exercise, it changes its context with the type of 7th chord, but it's the same physical exercise every single day. So inevitably, you're going to start to install better chords in your hands, which then show up in your arpeggiations. You know, if you're used to playing this chord over G minor 7, then a lot of times when you're soloing, you're going to play something like... A lot of times there's things that we arpeggiate and play just as lines that basically are remnants of what was learned as a chord. And so in my case, that shows itself with kind of maybe a little bit more angular, intervallically spread out things. Like that's kind of the sound that I kind of prefer to play with when I'm playing. I really like to try to cover a lot of range on the piano, and so, you know, also gets you from point A to point B a little faster when there's less notes involved, and brings some more clarity.